think I pretty much know everybody on the call here, but we'll just go ahead and do introductions anyways. Let me get my handy dandy screen going. All right, so welcome everybody. We're officially now calling this the CliffsNotes Book Club. It's a little hard to say with all the S's.
Why don't we call it the CNB?
I looked it up. That's the official spelling, so I'm just gonna go with it. I should know. I leveraged CliffsNotes so much when I was a kid. So we, we're the sponsor Mendello Consulting Group. We say when you get people, you get results, which I think is really appropriate for this book today about how do you get people? How do you read people? How do you understand how people interact? And I'm really excited to learn more about this book today. At Mendello Consulting, we do virtual leadership training, soon to be in person as well, team development and coaching as well. So the book today is The Biggest Bluff. We're going to just follow our regular timeline. We'll talk about the actual book discussion starting around 8:15. That's when I'll pass it over to Judy Dickinson, who's our facilitator today. And then around 9 o'clock, we'll move into application. How do you all see using this in your work? What questions do you have? What challenges do you want to present to the group? Around 9:15, we'll close it out with announcements, any shameless plugs, any new podcasts that you know about, anything that at all that you want to announce, and then we'll close by 9:30. So at this point, I'm going to pass it over to Judy to walk us through The Biggest Bluff.
Just a little bit about the author, Maria Konnikova. Maria Konnikova is one of those people who make productive people feel lazy. She's just, she's only in her 30s. This is her third book. And she earned her doctorate in psychology from Columbia University. She studied under Walter Mischel of the Marshmallow Experiment.
Wow.
Yeah, Maria came from Russia as a little girl. So she has kind of an outsider's viewpoint of the world. She's very comfortable being a fish out of water. And she's written 2 other books, and I downloaded both onto my Kindle, and I'm going to read both. But I started one, The Confidence Game, which she published in 2017. And this is a book about con men, about swindlers, about people who are deceivers, who keep secrets. And to a certain extent, there's some crossover into the game of poker. I'm only 3 chapters in. I am loving the book, The Confidence Game. So if it's something that interests you, it just might be worth checking out. She's also interested, growing up, she loved Sherlock Holmes. And so she wrote a book about that, the way they think in that Sherlock Holmes stories, and it's called Mastermind. So that's a little bit about Maria and kind of what was the impetus. Oh, well, first, a few things about The Biggest Bluff. It's a hard book to define because there's a lot of layers to it. First and foremost, I think it's a psychological look at poker and the game and the way people deal with risk, manage what they can control and what they can't. It's a book about psychology, very much about psychology. It's a book about herself, her journey, she used herself as a test subject. Her specialty in her doctorate was decision-making under stress, and this was definitely a great example of that. And it's also a philosophy book. So how did she get started? What led to her writing this book? Well, in 2015, what is it? Queen Elizabeth used the term annus horribilis, or I don't even know how to say that. She had a really bad year once, and she said, this was an annus horribilis. And I apologize for saying it wrong. Well, for Maria Konnikova, 2015 was such a year. She had, it looked like things were going her way. She had her doctorate, she published a book, She was writing for the New Yorker, and then all of a sudden things turned sideways. She got an autoimmune condition that to this day they still don't know what caused it. It was to the point where she was so sick, her allergies were so bad, she was overreacting to everything that she couldn't even leave the house. And at the same time, shortly thereafter, her husband lost his job, and as is the case in the US, they lost their family health insurance. Her grandmother, who had also immigrated from Russia, who survived Stalin, Khrushchev, and Gorbachev, was healthy, independent, slipped and fell, and never woke up again. And this was just blow after blow after blow. And Maria kind of said, she goes, I'm someone who works hard. I do things right. Why are we in this situation? Why has life turned against us? And it got her thinking about the role of what can you control and what is chance in life. And that led to her writing this book. So she studies, Maria is like a polymath. She just knows so much. And one of the people she studies is John von Neumann, who is a mathematician. I think he's a physicist, was a mathematician, physicist. I think he worked with Teller on the nuclear bomb. He also was the founder of game theory. And he was but the one thing he really was, so you'd think he'd play a lot of games. In fact, he really did not like games. He did not like card games, because most of them he thought really were not about skill. The only game that intrigued him was poker. And he liked poker so much that he wanted to study probabilities. He was creating probabilities tables. And from those, he created algorithms, which led to some of the first computers. Some of the first computers were not born in a lab, they were born in a casino. They were
That's great.
They were born from his work. And, one of the reasons for this is poker is a game that is unique. It is not just about chance. I know that there was a show called The Queen's Gambit. I think it was on Netflix.
Yeah, that was great.
It was a pretty good show. And the woman who started that, it was really a show. I saw the producers, because I didn't learn much about chess in that game either. I still, would not be a good chess player from watching it or know much more about it. But you learned about, I guess, a solitary genius with a 6-figure wardrobe. I mean, her clothes were fabulous, we got to admit. It wasn't really reality. But the thing about chess is when you're playing chess, you have perfect information. You have, looking at the board, you have all the information you need. And in fact, my mother had a cousin who, I think in the 70s, he used to play chess with the Russians. And he would write a move and send it through, they had aero mail, send it to Russia. And maybe 3 weeks later, he would get another move back from his Russian players. He never met them, never saw them, but they had all the information they needed. And in fact, chess is a game that if you have enough computational power, the computer can play it for you because there is a right move. Poker is not that game. It's a game that there is a nice balance of risk and chance. And in fact, when I talk about it later, at the highest levels in poker, only 12% of the winners have a winning hand. So it is a game of skill, largely. Chance plays its role, but it is largely a game of skill. And that is exactly what Maria was looking for. What can I control? Let's look at a game and how we might learn lessons from it and apply it to life. What's in our control? What's chance? And how do we manage the difference? So she was working for the New Yorker. She was back working for the New Yorker, writing articles, and she decided, I want to write a book, and I want to learn about poker, and not just learn about poker, train for the World Series of Poker. Who knew there was such a thing? I mean, the World Series of Poker is a big deal in the poker world. I think it has a $10,000 buy-in. So you have to go in with $10,000, and there's an opportunity to win up to $9 million. So there's a lot of money at stake. However, Maria had a problem. She did not even know, she was not a card player. She'd never played cards. She didn't even know how many cards were in a deck. Does anybody know quickly? 52. 52, exactly. She'd never seen a game. She's an intellectual. She looked at this as a great exercise. And she really did not want to get into this for the money. She wanted to get into it because she wanted to write a book. So Maria did what Maria does. She went out and she found someone who would be a fantastic mentor. And in this case, she had to make the case. She met with a player called Eric Seidel. And, I still don't know anything about poker, but I know that he is probably one of the best poker players that has ever lived. And he's called the Poker Yoda. And he brings a very much a Zen approach to poker. He plays it more. There's a huge quantitative part to poker, probabilities. There's a lot to learn about poker in terms of what's a good hand, what's not a good hand. I think the only thing I learned from this book was they play Texas Hold'em, which is a game that has no cap, I believe. If you get a 7 and a 12 in your first two cards, you should just fold. That's the only thing I learned. So I will not be playing poker, at least not for money. But Seidel was an 8 times World Series of Poker winner. He has won tens of millions of dollars. And he at first was a little skeptical, but he liked her doctorate in psychology. And he's really kind of a polymath and a free thinker. And he thought, this could be interesting. So he agreed to take her on, but first she had to do some things. He gave her a series of books by this other poker player who's a winner. His name is Dan Harrington. So if you're interested in poker, get Dan Harrington's books. And so she read all of them. And then he said, you've got to start playing online. I need to see how you're doing. You've got to start winning in online poker. The problem in online poker, does anybody know? It's actually very limited. There are only 4 states in which you can play online poker, which may be a disappointment to some of you, or they are, and she lived in Brooklyn. They are New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Nevada. So if you're interested in online poker, you could go to Delaware and play. If you win, go to the outlets. If you lose, go to the outlets. I mean, it's not that expensive. But
you could
so
play
she would take
for pretend money too on the Oculus if anybody has those virtual realities. My 14-year-old is a big poker player in the Oculus.
Oh, okay.
The virtual world with pretend money.
So she was playing with real money in the online world, and she would take the PATH train to Hoboken in New Jersey almost every day and spend many hours in coffee shops just playing and playing and playing, and recorded her sessions so she could get feedback on them. And once she started winning, only then would Eric take her under his wing. So she did a lot of prep work up front to learn the game. And so there were some ideas, I can't cover it's just such a broad and deep book, but she really started entering small tournaments in the beginning, and she was losing a lot. She was, busting. It is almost the process. Eric said, you can do theoretical work, you've got to get in it and start playing. And losing, she found, was not easy. It was something that was painful, but she had to get over it. And you'll find that Eric Seidel, I think he's one of the most Zen people I've ever seen in any field, let alone poker, but he also was very unsentimental. And he would give her very good advice, but he wouldn't indulge her emotions, and he wouldn't if she lost a match, he wouldn't allow her to dwell on it. It's like, okay, what did you learn from it? Let's move on. Yeah, so one of the biggest, I think I have some takeaways and we can kind of go through those. And Jerry, if there's anything or any of you about poker, just, chime in. In the beginning, when she was playing, she just wanted to win some money. It was just like, I want to prove that I can do this game. But it's hard to know in games. Again, a lot of it is psychological, when to be aggressive and when to fold. Those are two big decisions. And Eric pretty much said, you got to pick your spots. There are times you're going to want to be aggressive and there are times you're not going to do it. It's just not make sense. But poker is all about observation. And so there's this model, I think it was developed in the US Air Force, the OODA model, and they use it in poker. Observe, orient, decide, and act. First, you've got to manage yourself. You've got to observe, orient, decide, and act. Eric Seidel said you have to have a clear process for every single hand. What do I know? What have I seen? How will that help me make an informed judgment? He said you can't act too quickly. But most importantly, you've got to have a few seconds of reflection. So it makes the activity mindful versus mindless. There's just too much money at stake, and you have to be very mindful about every decision you make. Now, the other part that's trickier is you're playing against other people and you don't know what their cards are. You know some of their cards, but you don't know all of them. So you have to start getting inside their OODA loop. You have to observe them. You have to start picking up whether someone is aggressive, someone is changing the patterns, the way they play. If someone's taking a long time to make a decision whether to raise or fold, there are signs there. But you have to start really watching your other players so that you can kind of be a little more strategic about when you want to be aggressive in the game. So his advice was pick your spots in poker. Sherry brings up a great point. I have it in one of the takeaways, and it's called the art of the tell.
Mm-hmm.
We hear a lot about the term poker face.
Mm-hmm.
And in the poker world, they hate the term the tell, because to them there really is no such thing. First of all, people who are practiced in deceiving others are not going to make it easy. And Margaret here says Paul Ekman talks about it as well, and she talks about him in the book. He said pretty much those who are experienced in reading faces are no more likely to be able to tell when someone's deceiving than someone who doesn't. And why is it? And as Jerry said, our faces, we are conditioned and raised from childhood to control how our faces, how we express ourselves. Active listening, we would be in classrooms, you didn't make faces to the teacher, otherwise you'd be in trouble. Sitting in meetings, sitting on Zoom calls, we are controlling our facial expressions all of the time. So this professor at Tufts University, Michael Stepien, he studies secrets. So there's a lot about secrets throughout this book. And he did a study of poker players. And so what they did was they filmed them playing poker. And he had graduate students do the study where he kind of divided the video into three pieces. One was the full film of them playing poker. One was just the face, and one was just the hands. And the one that studying the face was no better than chance in terms of how they could predict whether they were bluffing or not. The full figure, no better than chance. It was the hands that gave them away. And one of the reasons they believe is we spend a lot of time controlling our face, but our hands, we're not aware of what we're doing with them. Much less aware. And some other people that she studied said the same thing. You know, it is the hands. So it's just something to take away. You can start, if that, you know, resonates. The other thing that happens in the art of the tell, in her kind of when she's discussing it, she was talking about the psychologist Nalini Ambady. I'm having trouble with names today. There's something, and we've probably heard of this, it's called thin slice judgments. So when someone comes and, you know, sits down next to you at a poker table or in a business table in a negotiation, in 34 milliseconds, subconsciously, we are forming a judgment about them on traits such as trustworthiness, aggression, likability. These thin slice judgments, we do these subconsciously. We're not even aware we're doing them, but frequently they're mistaken. Hmm. And she ran into that quite a bit at the poker table. And I'll give you an example about it. The advice is to be aware that you do this. And it's just the way we're conditioned. We are conditioned to make judgments about people. Try to notice your quick predictions and catch yourself. And try to watch behavior over time. And you know, anyone who lives with anyone knows there are patterns of behavior, and you get very good at predicting what they'll do. Those are the laws of larger numbers. At a poker table, you don't have that time. So watching people's faces, the tell is really not a thing in poker. You want to watch patterns more so. So thank you, Jerry. That was
yeah, it's so interesting. It's so interesting. I see why these are life lessons.
And, you know, they are coaching lessons. I mean,
Yeah.
Eric Seidel, you know, who would have known that this World Series of Poker, I think he's in the, I don't know, they have a lot of awards to these. He's like the #1 poker player. Who would have known he would be a good coach, a good mentor? But he turned out to be quite the mentor. And he has these sayings, and I have a few in the notes, and I'll share this with you. But going back to our kind of the takeaways, one that she really took away from this playing poker was the risk of playing it safe. Mm-hmm. And, you know, sometimes we think in terms of chance and control. If we just lay back a little bit and we be more passive, we might be safe. It might be safer. It might be better for us if we remain passive. And in fact, in the game of poker, that means you're going to lose all your chips. You're not going to survive. And Eric Seidel had this saying he would say to her before she'd go play, don't be a fish. Don't be a fish. Does anybody know what that means in poker? You can probably guess.
I don't know. I'm just guessing, like, you know, they sort of float and coast.
Yes. Well, a fish is, that's a good, you know, you think about the ocean, and the ocean, just like land, it's kind of a levels of predators, shall we say. And a fish in poker is a bad player with money to lose. Whales are the ones with a lot of money to lose. And the sharks are the pros who pick them off one by one. So someone who's playing it too passive in the poker world is going to be considered a fish. Hmm. So it's something she learned, you know, she would kind of joke about it, say, they're not getting this fishy today, but it's something she just, you know, she said, you have to be in the game because the game is emerging. And if you sit on the sidelines, you're going to be taken out. I was thinking about Elizabeth Warren once had this saying, if you don't have a seat at the table, you are probably on the menu.
That's funny.
So just moving through a few more things. One of the risks, this is one of the probably the most important ones in poker and in chance, is the danger of going with your gut. Card shark comes from. Yes, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. This one I thought was interesting. A lot of people rely on gut instinct. We're told, rely on your gut. You know, your gut will not let you down. And actually, sometimes by doing that, people overestimate what their skill related to what the environment is trying to tell them. And they have a term for something where we are not conditioned to do well with statistical probabilities. It could be because we came from the cave, and if you were sitting in the cave and a saber-toothed tiger walked by, you know, you might be like, that tiger is the biggest risk to me. I can't, where there might be many other risks that statistically are much greater. For example, if you know someone who, God forbid, was in a terrorist related incident, in your mind, it might be, my greatest risk is terrorism. Well, in fact, your greatest risk is slipping and fall in the shower, or driving along and having a deer pop out from the forest. We tend to, it's called the description experience gap. So we don't assess risks relative to their statistical probability. We assess them related to our experiences, personal experiences. Molly's game.
Yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt. It's a
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
movie I watched recently and found fascinating. The true story of a former Olympic athlete who ended up running a high stakes poker ring where buy like $50,000, and then it didn't go well in the end. And she wrote a book about it, which is how the FBI came and arrested her. So I recommend it. It again is not about poker, but more around, you know, motivation, family dynamics, you know, risk taking, and it was pretty riveting.
That's fantastic. I'll check that out. Thank you. So one thing that about gut instinct, and a lot of this, some of this ties into also the gambler's fallacy, which Kahneman talks about. And I think one of the best descriptions was in this book about that is probability has no memory. It has amnesia. Each future outcome is completely independent of the past. And yet, a lot of times, you know, when in life we kind of feel we may be due. We may be due for good cards, good karma, good health, money, love, or whatever else that is. But probability is no memory. No, every time you play the game, you are not due for anything. It's just pure chance. And that's it. To be successful in poker, you know, and probably applies to life. Some of us imbue probability with emotion, with superstition. You go to, well, anybody who plays the lottery, every once in a while, who, you know, I do, but I know statistically it's probably not going to happen, but you see people playing certain numbers. You know, it's very, very unlikely. So you have to really understand probability to be successful in playing a game like poker, and probably in life as well. Okay, so I learned some new words in this book. And one I love is one called a bad beat. And a bad beat is, you know, sometimes you probably are the statistical favorite to win something. It could be a game in poker. It could be a proposal. You know, you want to win a contract. You've got a great proposal going in. You're sure thing, and you don't win. And it happens. And in poker, sometimes you should be winning, but you don't. And this is one of the disciplines that Eric Seidel was very picky about. He said, look, sometimes you're not going to win, but the important thing is, did you make a good decision when you were playing the game? And if you made a good decision, that's all you can do, and that's the right thing to do. But don't dwell on the bad beat, because some people bring the upset from the bad beat. They kind of consider themselves victims. They'll say the cards went against me, things are being done to me, things are happening around me, and I'm not to blame or not in control. Whereas the victor says, I made the correct decision. The outcome did not go my way, but I thought correctly under pressure, and that is the skill I can control. So his advice to Maria was just, learn from the decision you made. Was it the right decision? Good. Then that's all you can do. Bring your focus to the present and on good decision making. Now, there's a quote by Louis Pasteur that a lot of people are familiar with, and it's called "Chance favors only the prepared mind." But there's a first part of the quote that is usually left out, and that is where observation is concerned, chance favors only the prepared mind. And there's a lot in this book about clearing your mind, observing, and being ready for when chance favors you. And they talk a lot about lucky versus unlucky people. Sometimes the luck, there are no unlucky people. They have the same amount of luck. Lucky people recognize good luck when they see it. And they do that by not dwelling on the past. And Eric Seidel has this quote that I love. People who dwell on bad beats and bring that with them, he said, all they do is poison others. They bring that to other games. He said, don't dump your garbage on someone else's front yard. And I thought, there are times, that's good advice. Yeah, Sonia says, and rumination, people who ruminate endlessly, it's just kind of a learned helplessness. And in poker, you will lose your money and you will be out. So that's kind of the bad beat. Another word that kind of goes along with bad beat is a term called tilt. Now, tilt, it means sometimes, you had a bad beat or something happened and you're carrying negative emotions, or it can be positive emotions. You can get good emotions from tilt. So good things can happen. But if you take those emotions and you apply them to decisions that are not integral to those emotions, you are probably not going to make the best decision. And so it's very important to not allow tilt to affect your decision making. And it doesn't mean that you don't have emotions and you don't have good emotions. And if they're integral to the decisions you're making, they're fabulous. But if they are not, you have to recognize you have tilt, and you either have to step away from the game, or figure out a way to control those triggers. And Maria learned a little bit about that. She created a plan with a mental games coach to be more proactive around tilt.
Does she talk about that too in the book of what that looks like?
Yes.
That's
I'll get
interesting.
just kind of moving on a little bit. One of the other things that I think really kind of really impressed me throughout the book was process versus outcomes. And in life, there are things we can control, there are things we can't control. I mean, all we have to do is look at the last year. We had plans in February, the last time we met in person. And for many of us, those plans didn't happen, or they had to change. We've all been in a collective kind of year of uncertainty. So we have to be aware that our process does not always lead to the outcome we want at the time we want it. But if we follow a good process and we keep refining it, in time, luck will change. So there's a lot of talk about, if we've had a lot of luck, if we've had a string of luck, we are not aware of how luck has been a factor in our success. It can be hard work, but it also can be, we don't think critically about our success a lot. We think, we deserve this. It's karma. I've worked hard. I deserve this. But it's disaster that actually forces us to be objective. And it's really an antidote to overconfidence. So there's a lot that we can learn from it. Sometimes we don't want to. And in Eric Seidel's advice is separate process from outcome. In fact, Maria would report to him after she played games and he'd say, don't tell me whether you won or lost. What decisions did you make? Were they the right decisions? Let's look at the decisions. Because the outcome sometimes you have very little control over. Just keep learning about how to make the right decisions. And he has this quote that I think is throughout the book, and it's one that if I would probably say that he says the most, and it's less certainty, more inquiry. Just keep open to your environment, keep open to what you're learning, and you cannot worry as much about the outcomes because some of them you just don't control. So it is that growth mindset that I saw in the chat versus the closed mindset. Thank you. I want to move on to biases, which is on the list. We've all studied Kahneman, and Kahneman, as we all know, is pretty kind of pessimistic about our ability to get over biases. He said we live in them. He goes, I live in them. I can't really get over them. They are just part of my life. And Maria points out they're really a point of weakness for people. Now, this is the part of the book that I think it made me uncomfortable. There were some things in the book that made me uncomfortable, and particularly they were around sexism and gender. The highest levels of poker, it's a male-dominated game. It's 97% male. Wow. Very few women play at this level. And Eric Seidel, her mentor, said the women who do get there are the smartest players, at the tables, because they have to be just to outlast what they have to go through. So Maria had to deal with a lot of sexism and a lot of gender-related aggression at the tables. And she also had her own biases. So we'll first talk about one of her biases. She talks, I don't know, Jerry, if you remember this, there were kind of two examples. One was this man sat down next to her, he was from Siberia and she's from Russia. And he started, you're from Russia? I'm from Siberia. Oh, this is so great. I'd like to take a picture of you to send to my grandson, blah, blah, blah. And then they started playing. And he did something that she thought was particularly nasty. In poker, if you win a hand, you're the last one there, you don't have to show your hand. I didn't know that. You won. You outlasted them. Mm-hmm. He showed his hand to show that he did not have a winning hand. He bluffed her. And she thought that was particularly nasty. So she had a bias there. And then this other player, he sat down at the table. And I don't know if you remember this one, Jerry. This one laughed. He was wearing a white ribbed tank top. His biceps covered in tattoos are the size of small mountains. His head is shaved. And I think I know just the type. In my mind, I am already raising him and showing him who's boss. Now this player, they started playing and he was raising and she was raising, and then all of a sudden he folded and left the table. She ended up winning this hand, but this player left the table and all the other players said, are you crazy? And she said, what do you mean? She goes, he is the most conservative player in the whole casino, probably in the whole World Series of Poker. He only raises when he has a great hand. But all she saw was the biceps, the tattoos, and thought, this aggressive bully, and I'm going to show him his boss. So she had her own biases, and she had to learn, it's that thin slicing again, not to let her play be affected by them. She was acting on stereotypes and incomplete knowledge. So she was acting on implicit biases. But she also had biases against her. And one is she's a woman in a game that's all men. And the men were not kind. There were a lot of good men who were helpful, but she dealt with a lot of sexism and aggression. The thing that kind of, I found so disturbing was they would call her little girl. Hey, little girl, what are you going to do, little girl? Mm-hmm. They would goad her a lot. Mm-hmm. And they would try to get her to do a thing called a chop, which was if you're all in the game and there's a few players at the end, and usually she had the most chips. They say, let's just do a chop, which means they all divide the remaining money. Mm. And they tried to bully her into that a lot. But then she also had a player who literally was propositioning her. And she said, I'm married, I'm not interested, and kept propositioning her. She asked for the house manager and said, I want him removed from my table. And they decided not to do so because he did not use a bad word if he had used a bad term. So she had to deal. And in that case, she ended up getting so triggered, she busted out of the game. And so she had, these are biases that are against her, but she realized she had her own biases against herself as a woman in a male dominated game. She said she had to learn, she learned over the years, she's been conditioned that it doesn't pay to be aggressive while female. And she said it makes those in power, namely men, but some women, uncomfortable. It's not just perception, it is reality. So she referred to the study by Hannah Riley Bowles, who's a lecturer at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. Hannah Riley Bowles studies negotiating while female. And in her research, she found out that women, but not men, are penalized for asking for more money in a negotiation. They're penalized both men and in some cases other women. And it just reaffirms Maria's point. Perceived aggression in women is not only not valued, it is seen in a negative light. In men, on the other hand, it's viewed as evidence of great potential. And I know this is general, and I know there are a lot of exceptions to this, but this is something, a bias that Maria felt she had internalized her whole life, because to be liked as a woman is to be more passive, to not be aggressive. And in poker, you got to be aggressive. Otherwise, you're a fish and you're going to be out of the money. So she had to learn about mastering herself. She said, I had to learn about mastering myself to play this game. And along came Jared Tendler, who's a psychologist and a mental game coach. Who knew there was a mental game coach? Bye-bye. And Jared Tendler helped Maria identify the fears she brought to the game. He had something he called the beaten dog syndrome. That I don't know if I like it, but in essence, Maria was sabotaging herself. And part of it was, he talked about the future Maria. The future Maria was going to look back at Maria and say, why did you make that decision? Why did you bust out? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? And sometimes we do that to ourselves. We hold ourselves back because of our future judgment against ourselves. He had her do something. He had her map her emotional processes in a spreadsheet. So the spreadsheet would detail what happened, the situation or trigger, emotional reactions, and logic statements she could use to inject rationality into the issue. In other words, to mitigate the tilt from a bad situation. And she used a lot of strategies, but one that I thought was really effective, particularly for some of these things such as the aggression, the sexual harassment, was she carried sound blocking headphones to the floor. And which it looked like things were going to go sour. She would put them on. She could see the call. She could hear enough, but it meant whatever they said, they could see that she was not going to be listening to what they were, their taunts, their goading. And she went on. So how this ends is Maria actually went on to win, started this process not knowing how to play poker, and she went on to win six figures, $300,000, and won some major tournaments. So the title of the book, The Biggest Bluff, is like, what does that mean? It took me a while to figure that out, but it's that skill is not enough. Bad cards will come our way. We have to manage, keep our focus on how we play them. And, it's focus on process, not outcome. And in time, we will have good luck again, and we'll be able to make our way forward. So the luck again will once break our way. So that's The Biggest Bluff. And then I have some some kind of trivia at the end for fun. But one that I loved, the successful hunter in the animal kingdom.
Mm. Oh, wow. The dragonfly.
Right.
I would thought maybe the mosquito. I guess not in the animal kingdom, but with humans.
It's true. Yeah.
Yeah, this is great. I love that you put this at the end here. Is this something that was just throughout the book and then you just pulled these out as
I pulled it out from a
That's
variety of
so
sources.
great. Oh, that's great, Judy. I love that you added that in. That's really great. Wow, what a wonderful, wonderful recap. Let's